Yo, this is Chuck, and welcome to the How to Defeat Dudes video blog. First one of the year. So, first and foremost, let me apologize to you guys that it took me this long to get around to making a long-form video, and that I've kind of only been sporadically putting things up on YouTube Shorts. The biggest reason for that is, at present, I'm actually in the process of producing my very first martial arts feature film. It's called Eastbound Traffic, and it's something that I've been working on for almost a decade now. So getting that moving has been very much a time-consuming process, so I haven't had as much time for my YouTube content as I would like. But anyway, we're here for the martial arts content, so let's actually jump into some martial arts discussion. So not too long ago, I was having a really interesting conversation with a buddy of mine named Chuck Wilson. Among other things, Chuck is a 7th degree black belt and Grand Master of Judo and an All Japan National Powerlifting Champion. And he was telling me about the kind of psychological process that he goes through in order to maximize his lifting ability. Like in some of the most extreme cases, some of these guys will do things like they'll beat their head on the bar until it bleeds and stuff like that. Because basically what they're trying to do is they're trying to gain access to just absolute blind rage. And then once they're in that state, they focus that energy and then they put that into their lift. And in effect, they could lift about 20 to 30% more than they could than if they were calm. And just in case you want to see a sample of what that looks like, here you go. And then about a week later, coincidentally, I was watching a video by a guy who's a power breaking champion in the UK. And then one of the things that he said that really struck me, and that in the moments before he does a break, he becomes something else. And he didn't quite have the language to describe what that was. And then he takes that, he focuses it, and then he can just break massive amounts of concrete with his bare hands. Now, looking at the kind of commonality or common point between what these two gentlemen are saying, and then reflecting on, my own 30 years of martial arts experience and all the martial artists that I've ever known, and in particular, looking at people that are really good fighters, I think what they're talking about is accessing what I like to call your animal brain. Now, before I go any further with this, I'd like to say that I'm not a neuroscientist and I'm not a psychologist, and I'm not going to pretend to be one for the sake of this video. But if there are any neuroscientists or psychologists watching this video or listening right now, I would love to hear your input on this topic. So feel free to say so in the comments below, and we can just keep this conversation going. But basically, the way that I see it is that if you look at the way that the human brain develops, it develops in more or less the same way that it evolved. Meaning that it starts off with the brainstem, which is just all the basic functions like heart movement, like the beating of the heart and breathing and things like that. And then on top of that, you develop, your animal brain, which is your kind of emotional brain, right? And then on top of that is the cerebral cortex, which is the thinking brain, or I guess the human brain, if you want to call it that, the higher level thought brain, right? But the animal brain, it exists at the back of the thinking brain, right? And if this thing that they're describing has a physical home anywhere in the brain, that's probably where it lives. Now, when I think of this in terms of the martial arts, I think this kind of explains a lot of the more mysterious things that you see about martial arts. And also it kind of explains what exactly our job is as martial arts instructors. Meaning that one of the most interesting things that I've noticed about fighters in particular is that fighters don't really have any one kind of personality. And at least from what I've seen, person's personality and then their ability to fight have a complete disconnect. For example, I have another friend who's a 5-time national kickboxing champion here in Japan. She's an absolute monster in the ring, just a monster. But when you meet her as a person and you see her behavior as a function of her personality, she's really soft and feminine and almost like a super girly girl. But when it's time to fight, she just turns into a beast. And most certainly not to toot my own horn, but a lot of people have said the same thing about me. And they say, you're such a nice guy, I can't imagine you fighting. You're just such a nice guy, I can't imagine you fighting. But that's because much like with her, when it's time to fight, that's not really me anymore. That's the other thing. And if I could kind of describe what this process is like, it's kind of like having a dog in a cage. And most of the time it's asleep. But then as soon as the threat is perceived, its ears perk up. And then once the threat is registered, it wakes up. And mentally what happens is Chuck says, okay, I'm not going to deal with this. That's your job. Chuck goes and then puts himself in the cage, and then he lets the dog out, but on a leash. or once that fighting situation is done, then basically I pull the leash back in and then I put it back in the cage and then I come back out. And that's the best way that I could kind of describe what it's like. I know that this may sound crazy, but actually knowing how to balance you as yourself as an intelligent, rational human being, but still having this thing that you have access to is actually something that all fighters know how to do. And if you don't want to take my word for it, here's Mike Tyson talking about it.
I always cry before I fight.
You did? Always cry before you
Yeah.
fight? What were you crying about?
I don't know. That's just who I am.
Yeah, but go further. What's the emotion? Are you?
I'm getting ready to change into somebody I don't like.
You're getting ready to change. You change into the fighter,
Yeah.
and you don't like that fighter.
Not really. No, not really.
Wow, Mike Tyson. You are the greatest fighter that ever lived, and you didn't like that guy. That isn't the Mike Tyson I'm talking
No,
to.
no, not at all.
Now, reeling this conversation back in and then talking about what exactly our job is as martial arts instructors, I believe it's basically twofold. On one hand, our job is to teach the kind people, the gentle people, the sweet people who don't know that they actually have access to this thing, or whose animal is buried so deep that they don't know how to bring it out, to teach them that it's there, and to teach them how to bring it out, and to teach them how to have access to it, so that when the time comes, they can activate the animal to defend themselves. Not necessarily just in any kind of physical confrontation, but in any kind of a situation where they're threatened. And the other side of that job is when you have students whose animal is too strong, or perhaps the bars on the cage aren't strong enough, or their leash isn't strong enough, to teach them how to have control over that animal so that they can still have access to it and they can let it out when they need it, but they can control it. Because the other thing that happens is you have some guys whose animal is so strong that they just can't control it. So when the threat happens, they just completely lose it, right? And in both cases, what your job really is as a martial arts instructor is to help people to find this balance so that they're strong enough that no one can threaten them. Or if someone does threaten them, they can just handle it. But at the same time, they have enough self-control that they don't let that out unnecessarily, or they don't let that out more than necessary. So the other reason that I think this conversation is so relevant to martial arts is because this idea also sheds light onto why exactly you should never ever mess with people that you don't know. Meaning that when you start a fight with a stranger, you have absolutely no idea what kind of an animal they might have and how exactly they're going to respond to that threat. And as aforementioned, there's absolutely no way you can tell just by looking at them physically or even looking at how they walk or talk, because it's just about how their brain is wired. So just to give you guys an example, I've been studying Filipino and Southeast Asian martial arts for probably about maybe 6 or 8 months now. And if you compare me to the guy that I'm learning it from, I'm a lot taller. I think pound for pound, I may have a lot more muscle on my frame, and I'm about 10 years younger, right? But if you had to get into a fight and you had to engage with either one of our animals, I think you're probably better off engaging with mine than with his. Because, I mean, his animal, damn. And it isn't even just that. It's also the kinds of stuff that he knows versus the kind of stuff that I know. Basically, I'm a striker. Basically, he breaks bones. The other thing you got to think about, too, is life experience. You can't see how much fighting experience someone has by the way that they walk or talk or by their build. That's all in here. Or even where exactly somebody may be at that moment that you engage with them, right? To draw an example, several years ago, I had to go back to the States because my mother had just passed away. And needless to say, I was extremely distraught. And 2 days after the funeral, I was driving down the street with my family, and these guys decided to throw up Nazi salutes and yell profanities at us out the window. Now, had I been in a more normal mindset at the time, my response probably would have been a lot more controlled. But needless to say, that just wasn't where I was, and as soon as they yelled stuff, I rolled down the window and I yelled equally horrible things back. And then I started following them with my family in the car, trying to get them to pull over and then back up everything they were saying. Honestly, at that time, there was no leash. And thankfully, either they weren't listening or couldn't understand what I was saying, or they were just ignoring me, or they just turned a corner and went about their business. At that time, there were at least 2 of them in the car. There might have been 3. Honestly, I didn't care. And had they actually pulled over and gotten out the car like I wanted them to, if I survived, I can guarantee all of you I would be in jail right now. So anyway, I'm not saying all this because I'm trying to sound like some big, bad, tough guy or anything like that. The point that I'm making is that regardless of how someone looks, or regardless of how they're built, or regardless of how they talk or what their personality seems like, you never exactly know what's going on in here. And as such, it really, really does not pay to mess with people that you don't know. Or in a lot of cases, even people that you do know. Because they might show you some shit that you didn't even know was there. The other thing that I'd like to say in closing is that I've heard a really interesting expression. And that is that there's a difference between a good man and a harmless man. A harmless man is a person who doesn't know that their animal exists and or they don't know how to bring it out yet. A good man is someone who knows and understands just how dangerous their animal can be. And as such, they work very hard to just keep it pacified. But they have it when they need it. Anyways, thank you guys so much for hanging with me through this long kind of talking head video. The next few months are going to be crazy because I'm going to be dealing with the film. But after I can get that wrapped, then hopefully I can get back to making a lot more content soon. Operating under the assumption that everyone watching this video is either a martial artist and or someone who's just generally interested in fighting, I'd love to hear your input on it as well. So feel free to just drop comments below. And we can just chop it up and keep the conversation going. Again, thanks so much. Hope to see you guys next time. Yosh!